Have you ever walked into a room full of people and somehow left feeling more exhausted than when you arrived? Not because anyone argued with you, not because anyone hurt you, but because you carried emotions that were never yours to begin with. What if the loneliness you've been fighting isn't actually loneliness? What if it's protection? Most people believe that having more friends automatically means having a better life. They chase bigger social circles, constant conversations, endless notifications, and the approval of people they'll barely remember a year from now. But there is another kind of person. The person who feels everything. The person who notices the change in someone's voice before anyone else does. The person who absorbs tension the moment they enter a room. The person who gives and gives until there's nothing left. If that sounds familiar, then this message is for you. Because there comes a point where your nervous system quietly makes a decision before your conscious mind ever does. It decides that distance feels safer than disappointment. Silence feels safer than explaining yourself. Solitude feels safer than constantly carrying the emotional weight of everyone around you. And here's the surprising part: that doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you're antisocial. It doesn't even mean you dislike people. It means your mind has learned that peace is more valuable than approval. Today, we're going to uncover why some of the most emotionally aware people naturally pull away from crowded friendships, why protecting your energy is not the same as avoiding life, and how understanding this truth can completely change the way you see yourself. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop apologizing for choosing peace over noise. Let's begin. One of the biggest misunderstandings about deeply compassionate people is that others often mistake their kindness for endless availability. At first, it seems harmless. They answer every late night phone call. They listen when someone needs to vent. They remember birthdays, check in after difficult days, and notice when someone is struggling even before that person says a word. They give because it feels natural to them. They don't keep score, and they don't help because they're expecting applause. They help because they genuinely care. But this generosity creates an invisible risk. The more consistently someone gives without asking for anything in return, the easier it becomes for others to assume that this level of giving is simply who they are and that it will always be there. That's where the shift begins. Not all at once, but slowly. The appreciation that once accompanied their kindness starts to disappear. What was once received with gratitude becomes expected. The messages arrive only when someone needs advice. The phone rings only when there's a problem to solve. Invitations become less about spending meaningful time together and more about filling a need. Without realizing it, people begin treating this dependable person less like a friend and more like an emotional resource that is always available. The interesting part is that the compassionate person rarely complains in the beginning. They don't want to create conflict. They don't want anyone to feel guilty. In fact, they often convince themselves that everyone goes through difficult seasons and that relationships naturally require sacrifice. So they continue showing up. They continue making excuses for behavior that quietly hurts them. They tell themselves that things will balance out eventually, that people are just busy, or that maybe they're expecting too much. Meanwhile, the imbalance keeps growing. What many people never notice is that someone who is deeply caring is also deeply observant. They pay attention to patterns. They notice who checks on them without needing something first. They notice who remembers important conversations. They notice who celebrates their successes instead of only appearing during moments of crisis. They also notice who disappears the moment they stop solving problems for everyone else. These observations aren't made with bitterness. They're made with clarity. Eventually, a question begins to surface. It's a quiet question, but it's powerful. If I stopped giving so much, would this relationship still exist? That question changes everything. Once it enters the mind, every interaction becomes evidence. Every conversation either strengthens the relationship or reveals its imbalance. Sometimes the answer is reassuring. There are people who genuinely care, who give back in their own ways, and who value the relationship beyond convenience. But sometimes the answer is painful. Sometimes silence replaces connection the moment the giving slows down. One of the hardest lessons to learn is that not everyone loves the person. Some people simply love what the person provides. There is a difference. Someone may appreciate your advice without appreciating you. They may enjoy your support without ever asking how you're doing. They may depend on your patience while offering very little patience in return. At first, these differences are easy to ignore because kindness naturally focuses outward. But over time, they become impossible to overlook. This realization doesn't usually create anger. It creates exhaustion. Imagine carrying emotional weight for years without anyone asking whether you're tired. Imagine always being the safe place for others while having nowhere to place your own burdens. Even the strongest heart has limits. Compassion is powerful, but it isn't limitless. Emotional energy, just like physical energy, has to be restored. When someone spends years pouring into everyone else without receiving genuine care in return, they begin to feel empty. That's why the change often surprises everyone except the person who has been experiencing it. From the outside, it looks sudden. One day they're always available, and the next day they're distant. Friends wonder what happened. Family members become confused. Some even accuse them of changing, but what appears sudden has usually been developing for months or even years. The silence wasn't created overnight. It was built one ignored feeling at a time, one one-sided conversation at a time, one unappreciated act of kindness after another. People often expect dramatic endings because movies and social media have taught us that every important relationship ends with a confrontation. Real life is often much quieter. Sometimes there is no final argument, no emotional speech, no list of complaints. There is simply a moment when someone realizes they can no longer keep abandoning themselves just to make everyone else comfortable. From that point forward, their priorities begin to shift. They stop saying yes to everything. They stop apologizing for needing rest. They stop chasing people who never made an effort to stay connected. Instead of constantly proving their value through service, they begin asking a different question. Who values me when I have nothing to offer except my presence? That question filters relationships faster than almost anything else. Interestingly, the people who benefited the most from unlimited kindness are often the first to notice the change. Suddenly, messages aren't answered immediately. Every problem isn't solved within minutes. Every request doesn't receive an automatic yes. To someone who respected healthy boundaries all along, this adjustment feels normal. To someone who had become accustomed to endless access, it feels like rejection. But healthy boundaries are not rejection. They are recognition. They are the moment someone understands that protecting their own well-being isn't selfish, it's necessary. A relationship that can survive boundaries is usually built on respect. A relationship that falls apart the moment boundaries appear was often dependent on imbalance from the beginning. The most remarkable transformation happens internally. Instead of measuring their worth by how useful they are to other people, they begin measuring it by how honestly they are living. They discover that they don't have to earn love through constant sacrifice. They don't have to exhaust themselves to deserve belonging. The right people don't require endless proof of loyalty. They appreciate kindness without exploiting it. They accept generosity without expecting it. They understand that care flows in both directions. And that is why, when someone has spent too long being valued only for what they give, they rarely leave with anger. They leave with clarity. They don't disappear because they stopped caring. They disappear because they finally started caring about themselves with the same sincerity they had always offered everyone else. Trust is one of those things that most people believe is built through grand gestures, dramatic promises, or unforgettable moments. In reality, it grows in much quieter ways. It grows through consistency. It grows through honesty when honesty is inconvenient. It grows through keeping small promises that nobody else remembers. For someone who is deeply sensitive to the emotional world around them, trust is never measured by words alone. Words can be rehearsed. Promises can be made in seconds. What truly matters is whether actions continue telling the same story long after the conversation has ended. People who are highly empathetic often pay attention to details that others overlook. They notice changes in tone before they notice changes in words. They recognize hesitation where someone else hears confidence. They remember conversations from months ago and compare them to what is happening today. This isn't because they are looking for reasons to doubt people. It's because their minds naturally search for emotional consistency. They want to believe people are genuine, and they quietly collect evidence that supports or challenges that belief over time. Because of this, trust rarely breaks because of one mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has moments when fear, stress, or poor judgment gets the better of them. Most compassionate people understand that. They know life is complicated. They know people are imperfect. They are often among the first to forgive because they understand what it feels like to need grace themselves. They recognize sincere regret, and they appreciate genuine accountability. One difficult conversation rarely destroys a meaningful relationship. The real damage begins when the same pattern repeats itself. A promise is broken, followed by another promise that sounds almost identical. An apology is offered, but nothing changes afterward. Someone says, "I'll do better next time," yet the next time looks exactly like the last. At first, hope keeps the relationship alive. Hope whispers that people can change. Hope encourages patience. Hope reminds them of the person's good qualities. But hope becomes difficult to hold on to when experience keeps delivering the same outcome. There is an important difference between forgiving someone and continuing to trust them. Many people confuse the two. Forgiveness allows the heart to let go of resentment. Trust requires evidence that the future will be different from the past. Without that evidence, trust slowly fades, no matter how much forgiveness exists. A compassionate person may sincerely forgive someone while quietly deciding they can no longer rely on them. That decision often happens long before anyone else realizes it. What makes this process difficult to notice is that it happens internally. There are no dramatic announcements. There is no countdown. There is simply a gradual shift in how much access someone is given. Conversations become shorter. Personal thoughts are shared less often. Emotional vulnerability begins to disappear. The relationship may continue on the surface, but something essential has already changed underneath. The door is still open, but it is no longer unlocked. Many people assume trust disappears after a major betrayal, but in reality, it is often the small moments that matter most. It's the message that never receives a reply after someone promised they would be there. It's the private conversation that somehow becomes public. It's the repeated habit of minimizing another person's feelings instead of trying to understand them. None of these moments seem significant by themselves, yet together they create a pattern that becomes impossible to ignore. The human mind naturally looks for consistency because consistency creates safety. When someone's behavior becomes unpredictable, the nervous system begins preparing for disappointment before it even arrives. The body learns what the conscious mind is still trying to deny. It becomes cautious. It hesitates before opening up. It questions whether sharing another vulnerable thought is worth the risk. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about protecting emotional stability after experiencing repeated uncertainty. One of the most misunderstood aspects of broken trust is silence. People often expect someone who has been hurt to express every disappointment in detail. But not everyone processes pain that way. Some individuals spend more time observing than confronting. They believe repeated explanations lose their value if nothing changes afterward. Eventually, they stop arguing, not because the issue has been resolved, but because they have realized that repeating themselves will not create a different outcome. This silence is frequently mistaken for acceptance. Someone assumes everything is fine simply because no one is complaining anymore. In reality, silence can sometimes be the final stage before emotional distance. The conversations continue, but the investment begins to fade. Smiles remain polite, but they no longer carry the same warmth. Presence becomes physical instead of emotional. The relationship exists, yet the connection that once gave it life has quietly begun to disappear. There is another pattern that gradually weakens trust, and that is emotional manipulation. It can appear in subtle forms. A person's concerns are dismissed as being too sensitive. Their memories are questioned whenever they describe something hurtful. Their kindness is used to make them feel responsible for problems they did not create. Over time, these experiences create confusion. Instead of feeling emotionally safe, They begin questioning themselves more than they question the behavior causing the pain. The turning point often arrives unexpectedly. It isn't necessarily triggered by the biggest betrayal. Sometimes it is one small disappointment that finally confirms what countless earlier experiences have been trying to reveal. Suddenly, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. What once seemed like isolated incidents now fits together with complete clarity. The relationship is no longer judged by promises or intentions. It is judged by repeated behavior. At that moment, something changes inside. The focus shifts away from convincing the other person to become trustworthy. Instead, the focus turns toward protecting inner peace. Energy that was once spent explaining, hoping, and waiting begins moving toward healing. This decision is rarely motivated by anger. It is motivated by understanding. They recognize that trust cannot survive on words alone. It must be supported by actions that remain consistent over time. The surprising part is that those who repeatedly damaged the trust are often shocked by the outcome. They remember every apology they offered, but they overlook every action that contradicted it. They see the final distance without recognizing the long journey that led there. To them, it feels sudden. To the person quietly walking away, the decision has been forming for a very long time. Healthy relationships never demand perfect people. They require honest people. They require individuals who admit mistakes, accept responsibility, and make visible efforts to change. Trust does not return because enough time has passed. It returns because consistent behavior creates new evidence. Every kept promise, every honest conversation, every respectful action slowly rebuilds what was once damaged. Without those actions, trust remains only a memory. When someone who values emotional honesty finally steps away, it is rarely because they stopped believing in people. It is because they learned that protecting their peace sometimes means accepting reality instead of chasing potential. They understand that genuine trust is one of life's most valuable gifts, and once repeated actions prove that gift is no longer safe, they quietly choose distance. Not as punishment, but as an act of self-respect and emotional wisdom. There comes a point in some relationships where the issue is no longer whether someone cares enough. The issue becomes whether caring has turned into a constant source of exhaustion. There is a common belief that people who are deeply compassionate can handle unlimited emotional weight simply because they have always appeared strong. They are the ones others call during moments of crisis. They listen without interrupting. They comfort without judging. They give advice without expecting recognition. From the outside, it seems as though they have an endless capacity for understanding. But beneath that calm exterior is a human being whose emotional energy is just as limited as anyone else's. The challenge is that emotionally aware people often spend so much time understanding everyone else that they forget to ask a simple question. What is all of this costing me? Every difficult conversation, every unresolved conflict, every attempt to keep peace between other people requires emotional energy. At first, they don't notice the cost because helping feels meaningful. They find purpose in being there for others. They genuinely want to reduce pain wherever they can. But over time, if that giving is never balanced with rest, respect, and mutual care, the emotional account slowly begins to run empty. Many people mistake patience for unlimited tolerance. Those are not the same thing. Patience allows someone to remain calm during difficult moments. Unlimited tolerance allows unhealthy patterns to continue without consequence. The compassionate person often begins with patience. They assume people are doing the best they can. They excuse harsh words spoken during stressful days. They overlook forgotten promises. They forgive misunderstandings. They believe that everyone deserves another chance. What they don't always realize is that repeated exposure to unhealthy behavior slowly changes the way their nervous system responds. The body has a remarkable ability to recognize patterns before the conscious mind fully understands them. You may find yourself feeling tense before meeting certain people without immediately knowing why. You may notice that your shoulders tighten when a particular name appears on your phone. You may feel emotionally drained after conversations that seem perfectly ordinary on the surface. These reactions are not random. They are signals. They are your mind and body communicating that something about these interactions consistently leaves you feeling depleted rather than restored. This is where emotional chaos quietly enters the picture. Chaos is not always loud. It is not always shouting arguments or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it looks like constant unpredictability. One day someone is supportive, the next day they are distant without explanation. One week they appreciate everything you do, the following week they criticize the very qualities they once admired. You never quite know which version of them you are going to encounter. Living inside that uncertainty slowly wears down emotional stability because your mind is always preparing for the next unexpected shift. Another form of emotional chaos comes from relationships where every conversation revolves around negativity. Every meeting becomes a discussion about problems that never seem to have solutions. Every interaction leaves you carrying worries that were never yours to begin with. You become the listener, the encourager, the problem solver, while your own emotional needs quietly move further into the background. At first, it feels compassionate to continue helping. Eventually, it begins to feel like you are carrying someone else's backpack while climbing your own mountain. There is also the quiet exhaustion that comes from constantly explaining yourself. Some people genuinely want to understand you. Others only want to argue with your perspective until it matches theirs. When every honest conversation turns into a debate about your feelings, your intentions, or your experiences, you eventually stop sharing altogether. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you recognize that not every listener is seeking understanding. Some are simply waiting for their turn to disagree. One of the most overlooked truths about emotional well-being is that peace has value. It cannot always be measured in achievements, income, or social status, yet it influences every part of life. Peace allows clear thinking. Peace improves decision-making. Peace strengthens physical health by reducing constant stress. Peace creates room for creativity, joy, and meaningful relationships. Once someone experiences genuine inner peace, they become much more protective of it. They begin recognizing which environments nourish them and which ones quietly consume them. This is why distance sometimes becomes an act of wisdom rather than avoidance. From the outside, it may appear that someone is withdrawing from people. In reality, they are often withdrawing from repeated patterns that have proven unhealthy. They are not rejecting connection. They are rejecting unnecessary emotional turmoil. There is a profound difference between the two. Healthy relationships bring moments of disagreement, but they also bring safety, encouragement, and mutual respect. Unhealthy relationships create a cycle where emotional recovery becomes necessary after nearly every interaction. People are often surprised when someone who has always been available suddenly becomes difficult to reach. They wonder why messages receive shorter replies. They wonder why invitations are politely declined. They assume the person has changed. What they rarely consider is that the person has simply become more aware of the emotional cost attached to certain relationships. Awareness changes priorities. Once someone understands that protecting their peace improves every area of their life, it becomes much harder to ignore the warning signs they once dismissed. Choosing peace is not about building walls around your life. It is about building healthy doors. Walls keep everyone out. Doors allow the right people in while giving you the freedom to close them when necessary. Emotional maturity is not measured by how much pain you can tolerate. It is measured by how wisely you choose the environments that shape your mind, your heart, and your future. There is another misconception that deserves attention. Many people believe that walking away is an act of weakness because it avoids confrontation. In reality, leaving can require extraordinary strength. It is difficult to release relationships that once meant everything. It is difficult to accept that good memories cannot erase unhealthy patterns. It is difficult to stop hoping that someone will become the person they continually promise to be. Yet strength is not found in enduring endless emotional damage. Strength is found in recognizing when hope has become an excuse to remain where peace no longer exists. Perhaps the greatest transformation happens after someone begins protecting their emotional well-being. They discover that silence is no longer uncomfortable. Solitude becomes restorative instead of lonely. They spend time with people who leave them feeling lighter instead of heavier. Conversations become honest rather than exhausting. Laughter returns naturally instead of being forced. They stop measuring relationships by how long they have existed and start measuring them by how healthy they truly are. This shift changes every future relationship. They become slower to ignore red flags and quicker to appreciate consistency. They no longer confuse intensity with closeness or constant drama with genuine passion. They understand that the healthiest connections are often the calmest ones. They are built on trust instead of anxiety, respect instead of control, and encouragement instead of criticism. Those relationships do not require someone to sacrifice their emotional health just to keep them alive. In the end, choosing peace over constant emotional exhaustion is not a rejection of love, friendship, or human connection. It is a decision to stop confusing suffering with loyalty. It is the realization that the people who truly value your presence will never demand that you lose yourself in order to remain close to them. The healthiest relationships are not the ones that require endless emotional survival. They are the ones where you can finally breathe, be yourself without fear, and discover that genuine connection should leave your heart feeling stronger, not constantly struggling to recover. Before you leave today, remember this. The people who disappear quietly are rarely the ones who stopped caring. They're usually the ones who cared the longest. They stayed through the broken promises. They overlooked the disrespect. They excused the inconsistency. They carried conversations, protected feelings, and gave countless second chances. While everyone else was focused on what they were receiving, they were quietly measuring something far more important: whether the relationship still felt safe. And when that feeling of safety disappeared, so did they. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. The truth is, every healthy relationship is built on three simple foundations: appreciation, trust, and peace. Remove any one of those long enough, and even the strongest connection begins to weaken. Remove all three, and eventually there is nothing left to hold on to except memories. If you recognize yourself in this message, let it be a reminder that protecting your emotional well-being is not selfish. You don't have to earn love by sacrificing your peace. You don't have to remain in relationships that constantly drain your spirit just because you've invested years into them. The right people won't make you feel guilty for having boundaries. They'll respect them. They'll appreciate your honesty. And they'll value your presence even when you have nothing to offer except your authentic self. And if, while listening to this, someone else's face came to mind, don't wait until their silence becomes permanent. Appreciation loses its power when it's expressed too late. Trust grows through consistent actions, not occasional apologies. Sometimes the smallest act of genuine respect today can preserve a relationship that might otherwise quietly disappear tomorrow. So here's one final question to take with you. Who in your life feels emotionally safe because of you? And just as importantly, who makes you feel emotionally safe enough to stay? The answer to those two questions may reveal everything you need to know about the relationships worth protecting. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on the people who bring peace into your life and strive to be that kind of person for others. Because in a world filled with noise, pressure, and emotional uncertainty, the greatest gift anyone can offer isn't perfection. It's making another human being feel seen, respected, trusted, and safe enough to never feel the need to quietly disappear. Thank you for listening.